Ah, oh, oh, warten Sie einen Moment und versuchen. Okay, yes. Yeah, hello and warm welcome to BI streaming channel, and today the second session with Matthias Tierbach, the creator of Power BI tools and Microsoft MVP and yeah, well-known developer.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, first month with the new company is over. It was quite a good ride this year, and I
Mm-hmm.
hope you're well too. So
Doing great, yeah. We
cool
were just
shirt.
talking before we went live. I installed lots of new audio and video equipment, so it's a bit of a risky test run today. My very first actual live stream on that, but fingers crossed.
Yeah,
And hopefully
awesome.
people will enjoy much better audio and video quality.
It sounds very clean, and I think like me, you're also a cautious person to still
Mm.
put on the earphones because yeah, I just think it's more safe than having the speaker and hoping there is no noise then. Yeah, but today it's not only about audio and video because that's great, that's fine. Today it's also about APIs, and Microsoft announced a few days like a very interesting update. So I still need to check out, but I think you have even more today.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot to be said about Fabric APIs because most of them have been released rather quietly. I remember I did a CI/CD talk last year. I think that was Utrecht, and mentioned some of those APIs, and no one in the audience was aware of them. And as you mentioned, some new capabilities were just announced yesterday, actually, on the Fabric blog regarding Git integration. So there's actually a lot to talk about, and I thought let's do. Well, what I've prepared is an interactive demo, basically taking all the existing APIs, both Power BI and Fabric, and actually go end to end, showing how we could set up an entire workspace with data sets and reports and whatnot, and Git integration using APIs and nothing else. So yeah, that's what I want to run through, and all of that is going to be available in GitHub as open source code. So what I'm showing right now, anyone can access after the stream. I haven't published it yet, but I will do immediately, and we can share the link in the notes. Maybe.
Okay, so we have a big premiere today, and yeah, when you share your screen, the stage is yours.
All
Then I
right.
will mute myself
Present.
so you have a clean presentation.
Share screen. Entire screen. Just wanna right. Looks like screen one. Let me.
Yes.
Can you see
Yeah.
VS Code in the
Some
background and
some dark
Fabric?
mode. Yes.
Yeah, very good. Awesome. Cool.
Great. So
All
the
right. So
stage
let
is
me.
yours.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks very much. Let me dive straight in. There's a lot to talk about. So that's the Fabric block update we just mentioned. Fab 12 automate CI/CD pipelines with Git REST API. So there's a nice article here by Noam. So not going to read through that now, obviously, but what I wanted to show is, first of all, I've created this shortcut here. If you go to learn.microsoft.com/rest/API/fabric, you actually get an overview and documentation of all APIs released, everything that's public. And looking down here, which is the reference documentation, we can see three, let's call them main areas. So we've got admin, domains, items, tenants, users, workspaces. That's quite similar to the Power BI admin APIs. So those mostly contain read-only access to everything within a tenant. Then we've got core. This is where the interesting stuff sits, and that's what we're going to dive into. So we've got capacities. New as of yesterday is Git. Then we've got items, jobs, long-running operations, and workspaces. Workspaces is quite similar to Power BI groups APIs. And then we've got some Lakehouse-specific stuff, which I don't want to go into today. So it's all documented here. But let's do demo time. If you want me to increase the font size a little bit, I'm happy to do that. But if you think this is fine, then I'll keep it as is.
So for me, it looks fine, but
Okay.
I have a big screen.
Right.
And if anyone has
let me
problems, just text.
I'll just go. I've just gone up once, just for the recording later to avoid any issues here. So what I want to do is list all capacities available to the current user, then create a workspace and assign it to a particular capacity, in this case, a Fabric capacity. Then I want to connect my workspace to an existing Git repository. I want to sync my existing items from that repo into the workspace. I then want to use the API to refresh my data set. I want to update my report in the browser and then commit those manual changes back into Git. And all of those 7 points happen completely via the API. And in order to control the whole thing, I've got a few parameters here. API demo 1 is the one I basically tested this all with. So this is hopefully going to be very smooth now because I've run through this already. So if I call this API demo 2, then we actually have a brand new workspace in my tenant. And what I've done here is, first of all, I've used the much loved REST client Visual Studio extension, which I'm almost certain I've talked about on Tool Talk before because it's just so amazing. It pretty much allows you to basically type all HTTP parameters for get, post, delete, put whatever request types in here, and also use variables and authentication details very nicely. So let's start by using the get Fabric capacities API. If I run through, it's going to tell me my token has expired. So that was expected. Just in case no one, people haven't used the REST client extension before, it's got a very neat way to handle authentication. You can basically use this special syntax, which will delegate the token retrieval to the extension. And in this particular case, if you specify a valid client ID, as well as the scopes that correspond to the API you're using, in addition to this special variable name, which is AADV2 token, it will actually handle authentication for you. Now, it will normally rely on refresh tokens, but obviously they expire after an hour. So what you can do in order to enforce a new token, you just put the keyword new in here. You only need to do that once. And if I click on this now, it will basically go through the so-called device authentication flow, which means you take this code, and let me just show you actually from scratch what that looks like. So you go to a special URL, which is this one, device login. That's microsoft.com/device login. Because since I used it a lot, I actually have it in my bookmarks bar, as you can see. If you go to that URL and then type in the code, the application has given you, so in this case it's CARSYJGN3, then you go through a normal authentication flow where you specify your Microsoft email and everything else. I'm going to do this off screen. And ultimately, sorry, ultimately, copy password. Here we go. Right. Continue. Right. So ultimately, you're going to see this. You have signed in. You may now close this window. If I now go back here and say sign in, sorry, that was a little silly. Let's see. Here we go. Right. So just confirmed, and now it's actually made that request. So what do I get here? I get a view of two capacities. FT1 is a Fabric trial capacity, and PP3 is a premium per user. We can see that here. The trial is always by user, as you can see. So the next thing is I'm using another really great feature of the REST API extension, which allows us to extract certain values from our previous request. So here, this is what I'm getting back. And what I actually want to have is this particular ID for my FT1 capacity. And this is how I extract it. And as you can see, since I'm hovering over now, it's basically showing me that the variable capacity ID happens to contain this particular GUID. So I can now use that in my create workspace request, where I need to specify capacity ID and display name. Display name is the one I put in here as a script variable. So if I post this particular request, the result is always going to show up over here. So we can see that a new workspace was created, and it was actually assigned to my Fabric capacity ID straight away. I can actually grab this ID and go to my tenant, and I can just go in here and paste the ID after app.powerbi.com/groups in order to see. Here we go. I've got a brand new workspace. It's a Fabric workspace. Even my custom description is showing up here, and I'm good to go. And the other thing is this particular ID, since I will need that in all subsequent requests, is also being extracted. So here we go. 2342 is actually what we're going to work with. I can now go on and actually use the get workspaces API. Again, this is a Fabric API, which pretty much gives me some metadata. So the next thing we want to do is to connect an existing Git repo, which I've got in my, in an Azure DevOps repository, to this particular workspace. And that's basically what was released yesterday. And if you've ever done this using the UI, you will probably be a little surprised, because there are more steps required in the API as opposed to doing it in the UI. So for instance, there is an explicit distinction between connecting, initializing, which we're doing here, and then updating. Whereas those three things actually happen all at once when you do it via the UI. There are three distinct steps in the API. Okay, so let's do the first one. Connect to Git. I've got my workspace ID, and then I'm specifying what's the Azure DevOps organization, the project, the repo, the branch, the directory. Posting this just gives me a 2 of 4. Basically, that one has no output or no response. But what I can do is I can do a git connection for this particular workspace, which basically shows me what's the current status. So this just came back. It's basically showing me it's connected, right? So that's the status. It shows me what are my Azure DevOps provider details, and it also shows me what the sync status is. We can see that it has not been synced at this point. Again, that's something you have to do explicitly when using the API. Awesome. But before you can sync, you actually need to init, which is yet another API endpoint. So I'm just going to run this, and what I'm getting back from this API is 2 things. First of all, it's showing me my remote Git hash. So that's one I will have to refer to later. So that's basically the SHA, the hash code of my most recent commit in my Azure DevOps repo. And then it's also got required action. There are 2 possible required actions, update from Git, or the other one is commit to Git. So it could also be that I've connected a workspace with existing content to an empty repository, in which case the required action would not be update from Git, but it would be the reverse, right? And so this init command basically determines what that is. And if you wanted to basically develop a fully automated application, it would have to look at required action to determine what to do next. So in this case, because it's update from Git, I can do a update from Git as another post request. And in this case, I actually need to access this remote commit hash. So that's part of the post request here. You can then also specify whether items are allowed to be overwritten. And you can also specify what your conflict resolution strategy is. Whether the repo should win or the workspace should win, or whether conflicts should basically fail the entire process. So running this gives me a 2. That's a very common API pattern. If you have a 202, it basically means it's a long-running operation where the location header contains a UI, this one here, and you need to basically pull that particular UI in order to find out what the operation status is. So that's a common pattern for long-running operations. And so I've prepared that already by basically here doing a GET request for the update from Git response header location. So if I run this, I can see the status in this case is succeeded, which means it's updated from Git. It's pulled everything I had in my Git repository over to my workspace. So let's have a look into the workspace, how that's changed now. This is where we were before, empty workspace, just created. If I refresh that, we can see there's a semantic model, there's a report, both code sales, and they actually have a synced Git status icon showing here. So that's what's happened now, right? Connection was created. We determined that it needed an update from the Git remote, and the update was performed. However, at this point, and this is something I pointed out before when talking about Git integration, the dataset has no data, right? The Git sync will only do a metadata sync, and looking into the report as I am right now will basically just give me blank visuals because there is no data feeding into them. So that's why I That's why I interact with the refresh dataset API, which is actually not a Fabric API. That's a Power BI API, which existed for a very long time. But one parameter I need for that is the semantic model ID. The API still calls its dataset ID. So for this one, I'm using the Fabric items API. List items gives me a listing of everything that's in my workspace. We have a report with that particular ID and this particular name. We have a semantic model with ID and name. So there we go. Those are the two items which were created just now from what I've got in my Git repository. And so in order to run an API triggered refresh, I need to access this particular ID. I do this in the same way as before by basically extracting it from my response body so that now I can actually do an API call to see, well, first of all, let's see whether any refreshes have already happened. So here I'm getting value and empty array. So that means for this particular data set, we don't have any refreshes at all in the refresh history. So let's do a full refresh. Here we go. That's a post to the dataset refreshes endpoint. And it's the same thing here. That's an asynchronous API, which basically gives me a 202 and a location URL. So, and then I can pull this particular URL and I can see this is already completed, right? So this is basically saying the full refresh, which started at 1822.00, ended at 1822.04, and it's now completed. Which means if I go back to my workspace and refresh my report, I will expect to actually see happy visuals with lots of data in it. So there we go. So cool. So we've got that. So let me do one other thing then. Since I'm in my workspace, let me go into edit mode and let's play around with it a little bit. So for instance, let's call this company A rather than the company. It's a bit of a silly change, but obviously it, just to make the point here. So if I save that and go back to my workspace, you are probably aware, as far as Git status is concerned, that we're no longer in a synced status, but we have uncommitted changes. We can also see this up here, where it's actually showing that both my data set, semantic model, as well as, it's really difficult to no longer talk about data sets now. So both my semantic model as well as my report do show up with changes. So, and what I would do here, by basically selecting and then putting a commit message in here and commit it, I can do via an API now. So let's just go back here. First of all, get git status is an API that allows me to see whether there are any pending changes. So what I showed in the UI just now is exactly the same thing that I'm getting in the API here. I basically have two changes, one for the sales report and one for the sales dataset. Interesting, by the way, that this is called dataset here rather than semantic model. I think this is something the product team needs to update. I can now go ahead and say, please commit all my pending changes to my Git repository. So I'm saying mode all, so anything that's showing up as uncommitted will be committed, and this is my comment. So if I send this, here we go. I've got a 202 yet again with the location giving me a UI that allows polling for an update. So let me do that. Let me go here. And here we go. I can see that actually succeeded already, right? So status succeeded, percent complete 100, which also means I can now go into my Azure DevOps repository and go into history to see that just now myself created this new commit called committed via API, which happens to have made changes on report.json as well as model.bim. Model.bim is a very large file, but you can actually click here to see that there was actually only one item changed. It happens that any API triggered refreshes are retained inside the dataset definition as a model annotation. So that's that one. So this is basically a Unix timestamp, which refers to the date and time of the refresh. That's the only change. Nothing else has changed here. All right. So, and then that's pretty much end-to-end in terms of creating workspace, assigning it, Git connection, sync, as well as commit. I've got a couple more examples here regarding the items API. So let me just show where they are documented. Here we go. So I mentioned core earlier. So we just looked at Git. The other very interesting bit here is items. So items are basically workspace contents like semantic model or lakehouse or report, or etc., etc. And we've got various APIs here allowing us to list them, create them, update them, or getting their respective definition. That's all work in progress. So for instance, uploading or overriding an item definition is only allowed for a very select select number of item types, specifically report, semantic model, and notebook, I believe. It's also documented here. Here, API is supported for a number of item types, and then there's a reference here which basically shows, yeah, there we go. Notebook, Spark Job, report, semantic model. Those are the only ones where you can do that. And I just wanted to show what that looks like. So first of all, for our report, since we grabbed the report ID earlier, I can use that now with the items endpoint to make a call to get definition. So if I run this, I should get back this. So we can see that there is a structure that contains, here we go, definition with various parts, and parts are the files we are familiar with from Power BI developer mode. So we've got definition PBIR, we've got static resources, 2 of those, 3 of those, and then we've got report.json, which pretty much contains the entire report definition. And we can also see that the actual payload is not is base 64 embedded content. So if you took this garbage and encoded it using a base 64 decoder, you would basically get a JSON document out of that. So that's what we're getting here. If I do the same thing for my data set, I'm getting this, rather different. And this is something to be very much aware of when you're working with the Fabric API. So in this case, it decided that the payload was too big to be returned straight away. And so instead it gave me a 202 again with a location header, which means I need to now pull this particular UI in order to find out when the back end operation that will that will ultimately make the payload available is actually completed. So if I now do a get on this particular location header, I can see it's now succeeded, but it took just under 2 seconds, right? So it started 29:43 and it finished 29:45. And now with this succeeded, I've got yet another location header which allows me to download the result, as you can see. So if I then do that one, I will get a very large payload, which basically only contains model.bim as well as definition.pbi dataset. And those APIs can also be used the other way. So rather than just getting the definition, I can also use them to update definition. So there's actually there's there are lots of really exciting use cases here, and we will certainly see interesting applications for this moving forward. I've got quite a few conference presentations coming up in the developer mode and CI/CD space. So stay tuned, because there will actually be some interesting automation and CI/CD scenarios coming, building on top of all those APIs here. But that was the run through I wanted to do today.
Fantastic. So quite amazing that it was a very new feature. Of course, you're an MVP. You, of course, have known a little bit before about it, but yeah, awesome to have such a walkthrough. And I will check about questions.
And as I said,
but
so we've got a script here of about 200 lines now.
yeah.
As you can see, we did go through quite a few individual API requests and responses. So I'm going to publish that on GitHub and make it available. And do we have any questions?
No, we have some likes and stuff, but no questions. For me, it was also quite some kind of self-explaining, but it's still good to have it all in once as a kind of walkthrough, because it's a very new feature I just discovered today in the blog and wanted to test, and now everyone has guidance for it. So if anyone has any questions afterwards, when maybe you're watching the recording, then just contact me, or maybe also you, Matthias. I hope so. And cool stuff. And as you told, I'm very interested to see some tools and use cases for this, because they will definitely happen, and I think you will have to do something with this.
If you allow, just to pitch a few things, because the spring conference season is upon us. I'm lucky to go to Germany next week for Data Saturday in München, which is
I will be there too. Awesome.
Awesome, very cool. Which is next Saturday, and I'm speaking exactly on this topic. Everything that's new around Power BI developer mode and CI/CD and capabilities with respect to those APIs and automation. So super excited about it. So that will be 1 hour or so. If you want to go really deep, I'm going to do a pre-con on March the 7th, Thursday the 7th of March, as part of, I don't know how to pronounce it, Power BI Gebrückestagen in Utrecht. So this is Dutch, which I don't speak. So if you fancy going to the Netherlands, it's a very beautiful town just south of Amsterdam. You can have a whole day with me on developer mode, automation, CI/CD, etc., on the 7th of March. Would be exciting to see you there. There will be many other things after that, but including MVP Summit, which is the week immediately after Utrecht. But those are the two most immediate events I wanted to pitch here.
Yeah, fantastic. So looking forward to see you in Munich. I will be there too for the pre-con with Nikola Illich, and we'll talk with him about fabric. And then, of course, I will be there on Saturday as a visitor. And yeah, surely I will you also watch your session, because yeah, really looking forward to more of this stuff. Yeah, and last look at the questions, or otherwise, if 5, 4, 3, 2, when nothing else is here, I think we can make a clean recording here, and yeah, see you next week in Munich, and everyone knows where to find us. Thank you, Matthias.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Bye.